I am Tom Mainelli, and I have the privilege today to talk to you about a couple of technologies that I think are going to have a fundamental impact on the world and on business. So what I'd like to do over the course of the next 35 minutes is first talk to you about the big picture around augmented and virtual reality. And then after that, we'll take a step back and drill into some of the specifics around each of these categories, where we are today, and where I think we need to go over the course of the next 5 to 10 years as these technologies mature and have an increasing impact on our businesses. So let's start with that big picture view. I think AR and VR are important because they really represent the next generation of digital, physical, and human interfaces. So what do I mean by that? Let's take these one at a time. First, digital information. For the better part of 40 years, we've been generating digital information. First, we started by typing on a keyboard at a command line. Later, we added the digital desktop and a mouse. More recently, we added 5 and 10-inch pieces of glass that we tap on furiously in the form of smartphones and tablets. But over the years, the interface itself hasn't evolved all that much. And so what excites me about augmented and virtual reality is that they represent an opportunity to fundamentally rethink that interface, to rethink how we create information and how we share information and how we absorb information. So you can imagine a future where we're not working on a digital desktop, but we're working in a 3D environment that sort of frees our minds to create information in new ways. So I think it's an important element of where we're going to go, which is that we've always created, everybody's been forced to create in the same way in the existing interfaces, and with this next generation, we'll be able to optimize for everybody. Next is the physical interface. So we've talked a lot about the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things represents the addition of networking and sensors to real-world objects. Well, I think augmented reality in particular represents an opportunity for human beings to see into the Internet of Things. So you can imagine walking up to an object or a machine and through augmented reality, either through your phone or on a pair of glasses, seeing the information that's coming off of that object. So that information might be, here's how you run this machine, an instruction manual, or information about the last time it was serviced. So it's going to be an important element of how we interact with objects. And then finally, the human interface. And I like to use this example. This is virtual reality. And what we have here is Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook announcing that Hugo Barra is going to join the Facebook team and run their VR group. Now, what's interesting about this is because it's Facebook, they made the announcement in virtual reality. And what's particularly compelling about this is that Mark was in California and Hugo was in China, but they were together in VR to make the announcement. That represents one of the opportunities I see in terms of the human interface, the ability to collaborate with our coworkers, even if we're in different places, or the ability to join family members for a birthday party, even if you are in another country. So lots of opportunity down the road around all of these technologies. So now I'd like to take a step back and drill in first to virtual reality. And to do so, I'd like them to run a video that I think shows VR as well as I could describe it. Please run the video. So this particular video is of a app called Richie's Plank Experience. And it's basically giving you the experience of standing on a plank many stories above the ground. Virtual reality is leaving one reality for another. You're occluding your vision and you're being placed into another reality. Now, virtual reality has actually been around for years in some way, shape, or forms. But it's only been the last couple of years where the technology has really matured to a point where it's ready for mainstream. In fact, I ran a survey just a few weeks ago of US consumers, and I asked them, do you know what virtual reality is? 78% of these US consumers said, I've heard of VR and I know what it is. Another 18% said, I've heard of VR, but I'm not exactly sure what it is. And just 4.5% said, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. But that's a pretty good number. Lots of people understand what VR is. And in fact, in that survey, about 13% of respondents said that someone in their house had already purchased some form of VR hardware. Now, a lot of that was Google Cardboard, which is the sort of the ultimate low-end VR experience. Some of it was Gear VR from Samsung, but a sizable percentage of people have at least experienced VR at this point. Now, among those who hadn't purchased VR yet, about a quarter said they were interested in buying VR hardware in the next year. In fact, when we drilled into that question, about a third of people said they expected to buy VR hardware in the next 6 months. Now, everybody in this room knows as well as I do that consumers are pretty good at telling us what they've done. They're a little less good at telling us what they're going to do, but this is pretty compelling. Strong interest in VR from consumers. So what I would say is that virtual reality has already reached a stage of maturity in which we are now in a race to reach scale. So what do I mean by that? Well, in 2016, we saw major hardware launches from Google, Samsung, Sony, Oculus, HTC, and we're going to see a great deal more shipped in 2017. So we'll see lower cost tethered head-mounted displays from Microsoft and its partners. We'll see more Google Daydream phones launched into the market. Just at Mobile World Congress, we saw the next iteration of Samsung's hardware. And later in 2017, we'll start to see what we call standalone head-mounted displays, which are self-contained VR products based on reference designs from Intel and Qualcomm. So the hardware piece is coming together. The platforms are evolving. So right now, the vast majority of virtual reality is being run on Windows devices and Android devices. And what's interesting about that is both Microsoft and Google are going to have a play in VR. Two of their biggest competitors are Steam with HTC and Facebook with Oculus. And those both run on either Windows or Android. So expect to see some friction as the operating system companies begin to battle these ecosystem companies for a place at the table in VR. Finally, all this hardware is not particularly useful if there's not good content. And what we've started to see is that the content is coming. In fact, I read a story just this morning. Jon Favreau, the director of Iron Man and Jungle Book, has started to dabble in VR, and he's got a VR short out there. So the good content is on its way. We've got aggregators on each of these platforms that are pulling together virtual reality content from many different places. And the advertisers are starting to pay attention. They're starting to think about, how can I use VR to promote my brand? So all of these things are going to come together over the course of the next 18 to 24 months. And we'll see a big shift from what has been primarily gaming in VR to much more mainstream use cases. In fact, I would make the argument that the big crossover moment in VR is right around the corner. And what is that? It's live sports. If there's one thing that a lot of people in this room will pay money for, it's access to live sports. And so right now, there's an NBA package where you can get one VR NBA game per week on your Google Daydream phone or your Gear VR. And so you can now watch an NBA game from the sideline or from right behind the hoop. It's a little rough around the edges, but it's pretty compelling. And if you think about the number of people who would love to have a courtside seat but can't swing the ticket price, you start to understand VR's potential. In 2016, we saw the first college football game produced in VR, and it happened to be the Huskers. Go Huskers. It too was a little rough around the edges, but you could see the potential in watching a VR game with your old college buddies, even if you're many miles apart. At the end of 2016, Intel announced a partnership with La Liga, the Spanish soccer league, to start outfitting coliseums with VR capture. So soon, we'll have live soccer available in VR. I've talked mostly about consumer, but we see big opportunities for VR in commercial as well, and I want to run a video that sort of outlines that for me. Could you run the video, please? So this particular video represents a software called OSSO, and in it, a doctor in training is being walked through the process of putting together a tibia nail. So you can see what he sees. You see that he's holding the controllers, which walk him through the process. So we're starting to understand some of the opportunities in VR around education, and there are many more. In fact, in Silicon Valley, they're already using virtual reality in their own businesses. So I had the privilege of joining a group of IDCers. We met with NVIDIA last week after West Coast Directions, and they are building a brand new headquarters in Santa Clara, and they have pre-visualized the entire building in virtual reality. So this has allowed their CEO and other executives to walk through the building before it's built. So they've been able to do things like change finishes, move doors, move skylights, create a more perfect building before the building is built. So in addition to creating a more perfect building, when I last spoke with them, they were actually ahead of schedule on the building, in part because of this pre-visualization. So at IDC, we're capturing 3 types of VR hardware. Tethered head-mounted displays, like the Sony PlayStation VR, HTC Vive, Oculus Rift. Standalone products, which aren't really shipping in any numbers right now, but they will soon. And screenless viewers. So that's your Gear VR and your Daydream, where you take a phone, you put it into a viewer that's got a little bit of tech built into it. We think all 3 of these categories are going to play a role in virtual reality going forward. So our current forecast from the tracker team shows about 10 million units shipped in 2016. Now that's on top of the more than 10 million cardboards that Google said have shipped since 2014. But by 2020, we get into the 60 million unit range with a nice spread between the 3 different categories. So growing opportunity on the hardware side. Of course, all that hardware, not particularly useful without good software and services. At IDC, we've got a team that puts together what we call spending guides. And they look at the hardware numbers from a revenue perspective, and then they forecast out software and services tied to specific use cases in a specific set of industries, with consumer being one of those industries. So I cherry-picked 3 categories from our spending guide. So we see healthcare VR spending across software, services, and hardware growing to about $1.7 billion by 2020. In construction, like at NVIDIA, it's going to grow to about $2.2 billion by 2020. And then in retail, which has embraced VR first, we expect it to grow at about $3.6 billion. And in this particular case, this woman is sitting in a dealership looking at all the different types of interiors that she can have built into her new car. So you can see the opportunity there in retail to offer a more customized experience in a space where you can't have hundreds of cars on the lot so you can look at everything. Now, I've painted a pretty rosy picture of VR, and I think it's moving along quite nicely, but there's still some challenges before the technology. Key among them, primitive interaction modes. So I talked about how important these interfaces are going to be going forward. But as you saw in the ASO video, right now, those interfaces require controllers and what we call outside-in tracking, where you actually have to put sensors up in the room. So we've got to move away from controllers and eventually to outside-in tracking where everything is built into the headset if we're going to get to a more immersive experience and less primitive interaction modes. VR is heavy on compute. You need lots of graphics processing power. And as the VR experiences get more and more robust, they require more and more data, which means you've got to move that data to the headset that's on the person's face. So a lot of compute and data needs around VR. Societal impact. I think this is something that we can all agree that technology markets don't always take into consideration. We often just rush in because we're sure that this new technology is going to be important and we need it. But I think with VR, we need to think carefully about the impact that it might have on some people who, for example, have addictive personalities, who maybe already spend 20 or 40 hours in a weekend playing on the Xbox, and how compelling a good VR experience might be. Just as important, VR is going to turn into a social experience over time. And just as we have a long list of challenges in actual society, we're going to run into those in virtual society as well. So we've got to think about harassment and even laws being broken in virtual reality. Finally, there's the human element. If you've not tried VR, the first time you try it, you may love it, or you may find that it makes you feel a little sick to your stomach. Some percentage of people will not be able to enjoy VR. Some percentage of people may try it once and never try it again. We don't know what that percentage is going to be. We won't know until we ship a lot more units into the market. But some percentage of people will not be able to do VR, which means some percentage of people may not be able to participate in these new interfaces. So before I move on to augmented reality, I want to finish with one anecdote from my friends at Intel. At CES this year, they put on what I would say was one of the most impressive virtual reality press events, certainly in history. There was 250 Oculus Rifts, 250 high-end PCs to run those Rifts, leather seats, whole 9 yards. During the event, Intel's CEO had people put the headsets on, take them off for different virtual reality experiences. But the thing that I noted the day after, and yes, this was Intel being a little tongue-in-cheek, but still, barf bag on every station, just in case. Happily, I don't believe any were deployed. All right, so that's VR. As excited as I am about VR, I think AR is the real game changer. And that's because in augmented reality, we're augmenting the reality that we're in. We're bringing in pertinent information to the experience that we're having. We can talk to our neighbor. We can continue to get things done. We can walk down the street without running into a light post. AR is the real game changer, but it's going to take us longer to get there. Instead of trying to describe what AR is, I'm going to run a video. Guys, could you run the video for me, please? So what this is a video of Microsoft's HoloLens and representation of what you see through the HoloLens. And what's particularly interesting about this is you've got 4 people all looking at the same 3D object in the room and manipulating that object with their hands. So you can see why I'm so excited about AR and why we think it has the opportunity to have a much more profound impact on our world and on business. So at IDC, we're capturing 2 types of augmented reality. There's basic augmented reality, which is sometimes referred to as a heads-up display. So whether you're looking at it through your phone or on a headset, you're getting basic information. You can respond to that information, you can react to that information, but you don't typically manipulate that information directly. And then there's advanced, which is like the HoloLens, the ability to take these 3D objects, drop them into your real world, and then manipulate them. So basic and advanced. So I talked a little bit about the coming battle on the VR side. I think it's going to be even more dramatic on the AR side. So to date, we've seen real-world products from Microsoft, who's shipping the HoloLens, and has recently renamed the Windows platform that will support holographic processing. They now call it the mixed reality platform. We've got Google, whose primary AR play is a technology called Tango, which is through your phone. So just so we're all clear, mobile AR, you're looking at your phone, you're using the camera that points outward, and you're seeing objects added to the reality that you see through your screen. And then there's Apple, who hasn't said or announced a product around augmented reality, but it's my expectation that the next iPhone will have an augmented reality element to it. And Apple doesn't really tell anybody what they're going to do, but based on acquisitions and based on the fact that Tim Cook can't stop talking about augmented reality, makes me think that Apple sees this as a huge opportunity. So we've got these established players, each owns an operating system, each is now in the hardware business, and they are establishing where they're going to play in AR. And then I want to call out 4 specific augmented reality hardware players, and there are many more, but these are particularly interesting to me. There's Daiquiri, there's Meta, there's ODG, and there's Magic Leap. Now, Daiquiri, Meta, and ODG are all shipping hardware today, and they're all shipping hardware that runs on somebody else's operating system. But they've created an interface, a layer on top of that operating system that makes their technology work. Magic Leap is a well-funded company in Florida who has promised us some groundbreaking technology in AR. Now, not all of us have actually seen the hardware yet, but it looks like it's pretty compelling. Until we see the hardware, we won't know where they kind of fit in the grand scheme of things, but there's a lot of money being poured into this company. So I would expect to see the 4 on the right battling the 3 on the left over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. So I talked about a consumer survey about VR. I actually asked commercial buyers about AR in a survey. And what was really interesting to me was a large percentage of US IT decision makers are already testing augmented reality for use on mobile devices. In fact, I was talking with the folks at PTC, and they have thousands of developers already creating augmented reality experience in a very straightforward way using digital assets that exist that can be viewed on phones and tablets. When I asked those IT decision makers what the primary appeal of augmented reality was long term, when we get out into the future, when we've got these head-mounted displays, They said they, of course, were very interested in increased efficiency, but one of the primary use cases was this ability to enable hands-free work. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about augmented reality is there's an entire group of people who can't use computers because they're using their hands when they're at work. And so we'll be able to do that with augmented reality. And then finally, increase safety. And as we think about robotics becoming a bigger and bigger element in more people's lives, I think augmented reality has the ability to make people's interactions with robots and other machinery much safer. So this is a real-world pilot that's driving return on investment today. Please run the video. So this is Daiquiri. I mentioned them earlier. And they've got a product called the Daiquiri Smart Helmet. And for just $15K, you can have one. But what you see them doing here is they're in a construction site and they're actually pulling in information and overlaying the existing construction with new details. So you can see he's flowing in fire suppression and pipes, etc. So that's not an inexpensive piece of hardware, but if you think about it, if you're building million-dollar buildings and that piece of hardware prevents a problem or solves a problem quickly, it paid for itself in a day. And that's happening now. That's a real product that's shipping today. Now we see two primary augmented reality markets evolving over time. There's this high compute creation-focused AR, where you're a mechanical engineer or an architect and you're creating objects and you want to see those objects in 3 dimensions. And then there's the low compute, more IoT-focused augmented reality that targets the deliver segment. So think about the folks on the manufacturing line, in the truck, on the truck roll, up the pole. That's where this part of the industry is going to go. We'll see a lot of cross-pollination, but I do think it's instructive to think of those two categories going forward. So augmented reality hardware is going to take longer. That's why I made a point of saying that for the next couple of years, we really see a lot of augmented reality happening on the smartphone. But over time, we'll see a transition to tethered head-mounted displays that are connected to a compute device like a computer, and then more standalone, like the HoloLens, where all the compute is built into the device itself. So our forecast is pretty conservative, relatively small numbers in the next couple of years. But by 18, we start to get some volume. By 19, that volume is cranking up. And by 2020, we're in the 15 to 16 million unit range worldwide. Again, all that hardware is only as useful as the software and services that run upon it. So I, again, cherry-picked some interesting stats from our most recent spending guide on AR/VR. And note, these numbers are much larger than VR. So in healthcare, we expect that by 2020, about $5.8 billion will be spent on augmented reality software, services, and hardware. In transportation, which has embraced augmented reality early, it'll grow to $6.6 billion by 2020. And in manufacturing, it'll grow to $12.5 billion. And this is just discrete manufacturing. This is only one element of manufacturing. So huge opportunities within augmented reality on the commercial side. Now, augmented reality has its own set of challenges that are different from that of virtual reality. First and foremost, optics are really hard. The technology that we're seeing in the products today has been developed over the course of the last 30 years. And big leaps forward are going to cost billions of dollars and a lot of time and effort to make happen. So optics is going to be one of those areas where you see a lot of work being done, hardware, software, all up and down the stack. Hand and eye tracking is key here. You can't send somebody out in the field to do hands-free work and expect them to hold on to controllers. So you've got to be able to track what I'm doing with my hands, and you've also got to be able to track where I'm looking with my eyes. And so we're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions around this technology as it starts to build up. If VR requires a lot of compute and graphics processing, I would argue that AR is more dependent upon network and backend. If you're going to connect to all of these Internet of Things devices in the world, you better have a good network. And you better have a back-end infrastructure in place to serve up that information when this device asks for it. So I think 5G down the road is going to be an important element for AR. Finally, there's the age-old problem of power versus portability. And we just happen to have two great examples of this in the augmented reality realm. Meta 2 started shipping at the end of last year, arguably the best augmented reality experience you can have today. Part of the reason why they can do that is it has a very wide field of view. Part of the reason why it has a wide field of view is because it's connected to a notebook. So a lot of the compute is happening on the notebook, which means you're tethered physically to a notebook. Versus Microsoft's HoloLens, people have complained, oh, the field of view is too narrow on HoloLens. Well, that was a decision that they made because it's a standalone product that runs on batteries. And you can't have as wide a field of view. You have to make these compromises. And so I think that's going to be an area where you see a lot of back and forth and tough decisions get made on what the product's going to look like and what the product's going to be able to do. If I put on my long-term prognostication hat, I think in 10 years we probably won't be talking about AR and VR as separate things. I think they'll merge. In fact, I think over time, AR-focused devices will just add VR as a capability. And why will they do that? It's because we'll spend most of our time in augmented reality. But every once in a while, we'll drop into virtual reality to take a conference call, to watch a live sports event, to attend a birthday party. But then when we're done, we'll step back out and into an augmented reality world. Where this starts to get really interesting is as we move from these sort of bulky head-mounted displays to glasses. And we're already seeing this happen. ODG stuff looks like a pair of glasses with a battery on it. And then we'll move from glasses eventually to contacts. We'll be beaming this information right into our eyes. I don't know how far out that is, but it will happen. All right, so in the minute or so I have left, I want to talk about essential guidance. Scott said earlier, if you're not acting in his realm, you're already behind. I think you have an opportunity to act now in VR and to begin thinking about what you're going to do in AR. There's still time to act, but companies are moving right now. People are creating applications right now. I fundamentally believe that AR and VR are going to change digital, physical, and human interfaces. And you can either get on board or you can rush to catch up later. VR is hitting the mainstream right now. So what does that mean? If you're a B2B business, you need to start thinking about how that might impact your business processes. If you're a B2C business, you need to start thinking about how your competitors might be leveraging VR to drive a better experience. If you're in retail and you're not thinking about VR, you are behind. AR hardware is going to take longer to get here. And over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to do it primarily on smartphones. But mark my words, augmented reality, much more profound impact on the world than VR. Finally, I really don't think it's a question of if these technologies are going to have an impact on business. It's really just a matter of when. My name is Mainelli. I thank you for your time. If you've got questions about AR or VR, I'm around all day. Thank you very much.